Modern Philadelphia, bustling and vibrant, is quite different today than it was during colonial times. During the latter part of the 18th century, Philadelphia was one of those rare places in time when great men and their ideals met the challenges of the day and shaped our country to the present. The Founding Fathers' meetings and activities occurred primarily in what was known as State House Yard, then the governmental center of the state of Pennsylvania and the city of Philadelphia. Since 1950, this area, now known as Independence National Historical Park, has been under the custody and care of the National Park Service. The National Park Service has carried out an extensive program of rehabilitation to the buildings and grounds and has also made available the history of the area to visitors and researchers alike. And it was here in Philadelphia from 1790 to 1800 that we established our capital. A video tour of Independence National Historical Park is a visit to America's birthplace. We will attempt to place in historical context the great events of the times and view these events through the people, their ideas, and their accomplishments. In order to be more faithful to the park experience, we will from time to time visit different park sites in the company of National Park Service interpreters. Come join us now as we journey through this most historic chapter of our nation's founding. Along with other Quakers in England, William Penn was persecuted for his religious beliefs. When he established the city of Philadelphia, he established it as a holy experiment. Quaker ideals such as religious tolerance, pacifism, and prison reform were introduced to the New World. Penn based Philadelphia on an orderly geometric plan, the first city plan in North America. By 1775, Philadelphia had become the largest and most important city in North America. Located in the middle of the 13 colonies between the Delaware and Schuylkill rivers, Philadelphia possessed a valuable deep port. Philadelphia's population was diverse and sophisticated, noted for its tolerance of different cultures. Walking down a city street, one could hear many different accents and see people in a variety of native dress. Daily life in 18th century Philadelphia was difficult by today's standards. Outhouses were the rule and bathing was rare. The air was polluted with chimney smoke, garbage and waste were thrown into the streets and streams, and fire and disease were major concerns. But it was also a time of increasing excitement. Impatience with English rule created a great swell of sentiment for political change.
Catholics, there were Jews, there were Episcopalians, and the list goes on.
Let's join a park interpreter as she takes a tour of the Todd and Bishop White houses to see firsthand how middle and upper class 18th century Philadelphians lived.
It was a crowded city. You wouldn't have this nice park-like atmosphere here. There wasn't this green grass. There were houses, and there were businesses right along Little Harmony Lane that we walked down. So what do we have here in Philadelphia? We have an exciting town, an interesting town, government, high society, people coming from all over the city, all over the country, all over the world to visit this place. But we have the realities of a dirty, smelly 18th century city full of pests, things rotting on the ground, a creek, essentially an open sewer flowing right through the city. And this open sewer and others are things that ended up playing a very important role in Philadelphia in the 1790s. This is something we'll talk about when we get into the Todd House.
Like the city's founder, William Penn, John and Dolly Todd were Quakers. The Quakers believed in simplicity, in their lifestyles, in their manner of dress, and even in their manner of speech. You'll see this reflected in the Todd House. This is a typical middle-class kitchen of the day. Water had to be hauled in from the pump outside. There was no refrigeration, but food could be freshly bought over on Market Street just 2 blocks away. Most of the food was cooked in an open fireplace. Breads and pies, however, were bought from local bakehouses.
And this room is one of my favorite rooms on the whole tour. It's a bright and cheerful room. We can imagine Dolly sitting in it. She was described specifically as a portly, buxom woman, a woman who loved to entertain, who made friends well. So you can imagine her sitting there having tea with these other people.
In the summer of 1793, a yellow fever epidemic arrived in Philadelphia, no doubt spread by the unhealthy conditions of Dock Creek. By October of 1793, over 100 people a day were dying in the city. Most of the city's population who could leave did so. Government shut down, but John Todd decided to stay in the city. He sent Dolly and their two boys to a friend's home in the country. The Free Blacks set up a nursing system in the city. They were led by two ministers, Absalom Jones and Richard Allen, who also founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church, still in existence today. On October 24th, 1793, John Todd died of the fever. The epidemic ceased in the winter of that same year. 1 out of 10 people died. Dolly came back to Philadelphia in the winter of 1794 despondent and with a child to support. But within 8 months, she met and later married James Madison, becoming Dolly Madison, one of our better-known first ladies. This house, however, did not fare as well.
For years and years and years, it was a business and a house, and this is how it looked in 1951, just before the park acquired it. It was a luncheonette. And the thing about it, at this luncheonette, they sold Dolly Madison ice cream, and they didn't even know she lived in here. There's a whole style of houses called Trinity houses.
Just a few doors down Walnut Street is the house of Bishop William White. The bishop, an Episcopalian, not a Quaker, was a wealthy man, and his home reflected a more lavish way of life than the Todds. The Whites had 4 children, and this is where the entire family could gather informally. The room had several functions. Next to the sitting area is an elaborate tea setting that was presided over by Mrs. White, and over there, an area where the children could sit and play games. Upstairs is a very special room, Bishop White's study.
This is a copy of a portrait done when Bishop White died in 1836. It was commissioned by his granddaughter, who wanted to have these 2 rooms remembered the way they were when Papa lived in here. And we look at this portrait, and we can look at the room, see how they match. And we see a room, a study that portrays a lot about the personality of the man. He was a very educated man. He saw just about everything you'll hear about in this park as you go through it. He saw the Revolution, the Declaration of Independence. He knew those men. He knew the men who dealt with the Constitution and this city when it was the capital of the United States. And he saw it while he lived in this house.
Like Bishop White, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson, many of our other founding fathers were born into the upper class of colonial society. A most notable exception was Benjamin Franklin, who came to Philadelphia as a poor boy and grew up to be one of the most influential participants in the founding of our country. His lifetime spanned most of the 18th century, and his influence was not just limited to the area of politics, quite the contrary. Benjamin Franklin's interests were universal. He was, among other things, an inventor, philosopher, statesman, and printer. At the age of 12, Franklin learned the printing trade in Boston, where he was born. At 17, he left for Philadelphia to find his fortune. He had little money and no job, but because he knew this valuable trade, he was able to get a job the next day. Soon, he became the owner of his own print shop, and not too much later, he was to become the official printer of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. One of Franklin's most influential printing enterprises was his newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette, a forum for his ideas and writings and the most widely read newspaper in the colonies. Franklin also published Poor Richard's Almanac, an extremely popular annual pamphlet famous for its homespun humor, wit, and sayings. Some of the better-known maxims are,
"Fish and visitors smell after 3 days. 3 may keep a secret, if two of them are dead.
So popular was Poor Richard's Almanac that it was second in sales only to the Bible, over 10,000 copies sold a year. So it was as a printer and publisher that Franklin made money.
There was a man named Thomas Bond from Maryland, and he was a physician. He was trying to organize a hospital in Philadelphia, but he couldn't raise the money. So he asked Benjamin Franklin for some help. Franklin went to the Assembly.
He proposed to the Assembly that if he could raise 2,000 pounds, they would then match that with another 2,000 pounds. The Assembly agreed.
Franklin's ace up his sleeve was his printing press. He started publishing letters in his newspaper. He was successful in raising more than that, so he received the 2,000 additional pounds from the Assembly, and that was the beginning of the Pennsylvania Hospital.
Wishing to attract higher rents and incorporate his latest ideas in fire prevention, Franklin tore down and rebuilt the shops on Market Street, then known as High Street. In rebuilding the row houses, he constructed this passageway which led directly to the site of his home. Unfortunately, Franklin's house was razed in 1812, and no exact plans exist. The National Park Service, in reestablishing Franklin Court, therefore decided to give a sense of Franklin's house by building this three-dimensional outline based on the form believed to be Franklin's. In his role as diplomat, Franklin spent over 24 years abroad in England and France, but he took much interest in the design and construction of his house, as his letters to his wife Deborah indicate. And in 1765, while Franklin was still abroad, Deborah finally moved in, but they were never to live there together, since she died in 1774, just a few months before his return. In all, Franklin lived here for a total of only 6 years, including the last 5 years of his life. One of Franklin's many practical ideas was an improvement on the city street lamp. Franklin proposed that the city adopt something very similar to this street lamp, with 4 panes of glass, an open bottom and a vented top. If one pane were broken, an individual pane could be replaced. Also, depending on which way the wind was blowing, that lamp might still work. Benjamin Franklin was very concerned with fire prevention. He helped organize the first fire insurance company in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Contribution Ship, for the loss of houses by fire. The Philadelphia Contribution Ship's symbol, or fire mark, is 4 clasped hands, which you see here attached to Carpenter's Hall, which, by the way, is still insured by the Philadelphia Contribution Ship. For any man, these accomplishments would be staggering, let alone for someone like Franklin, whose formal education consisted of only 2 years of school. Benjamin Franklin was an American original who helped make Philadelphia and the rest of the country the unique place it is today, and who grasped the importance of the times and added his own sense of what man could and should do and be. In 1732, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania began to erect a new Capitol building on what was then the outskirts of Philadelphia. The result was the Pennsylvania State House, the largest structure in the colonies, and an outstanding example of Georgian architecture. This style is noted for its strict symmetry. Every architectural detail, such as a window or door on one side, is balanced by an identical architectural detail on the other side. In addition, at Independence Hall, as it is now known, there are symmetrical connecting buildings on either side. On the left, Old City Hall; on the right, Congress Hall. At one time or another, this complex of buildings has been the center of city, county, state, or federal government. In Independence Hall, there are 2 large chambers downstairs. This room, the former Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, is set up in the manner of an English courtroom in colonial America. By the early 1770s, at the time this courtroom was in use, many colonists were becoming frustrated with British rule. Foremost among the reasons was the lack of representation in Parliament. Especially upsetting was Parliament's imposition of taxes, the stamp tax, the sugar tax, and the tea tax. Anger over the tea tax led to the Boston Tea Party. In response, Parliament passed a series of laws known as the Intolerable Acts. Important gathering places for hearing such news from Britain or from other colonies were taverns, which were more than just hotels offering food, drink, and lodging. They were centers of social, political, and commercial life for many people. City Tavern, built in 1773, was proclaimed by John Adams as the most genteel tavern in America. Demolished in 1854, but reconstructed by the National Park Service, City Tavern is now open to the public for lunch and dinner. Today, visitors can easily imagine the many heated political debates held here, especially the one on September 5th, 1774, when colonists marched en masse from City Tavern across to Carpenter's Hall for the first session of the First Continental Congress. Located near City Tavern sits Carpenter's Hall, which was built from 1770 to 1773 by the Carpenters Company and remains one of the handsomest buildings in Philadelphia. Although it is still privately owned by the Carpenters Company, which meets here 4 times a year, the grounds are maintained by the National Park Service and the building is open to the public. The top floor once housed the Library Company of Philadelphia, founded by Benjamin Franklin, but Carpenter's Hall is best known as the site of the First Continental Congress. The 56 angry representatives drew up a list of grievances against the Crown. They adjourned in October of 1774 and agreed to meet in the spring of 1775. On April 18th, 1775, the shot heard round the world was fired at the Battle of Lexington and Concord. The next month, the Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia. This time, instead of Carpenter's Hall, they chose to meet at the State House.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Assembly Chamber. This is really where it all took place. This is probably the most significant room anywhere in the United States as far as our history and the founding and forwarding of our nation is concerned. All of the states, at that time colonies under Britain, sent representatives into this chamber, the Pennsylvania State House, here in Philadelphia, at that time the biggest city in America, and the Second Continental Congress was called, meeting in this room in 1776. They argued clearly exactly what rights were going to be demanded of Britain at the time, and what they ended up voting on was a vote for independence from Britain.
John Adams, Robert Livingston, Robert Sherman, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin made up the Committee of 5 who were charged with preparing a document on the Congress's intentions. Jefferson, whose articulation and eloquence of expression was well known, was chosen to prepare the draft. Located on Market Street, a few blocks from Independence Square, sits the reconstructed Graff House, where the National Park Service has recreated the rooms that the tall, red-headed Virginia delegate rented for his stay. It was here that Thomas Jefferson sat on summer evenings in 1776, writing in only 2 weeks what was to become one of our country's most famous documents, the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson stated in the Declaration of Independence,
Human beings, by their very nature, are entitled to certain rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted. Later, on August 2nd, 1776, an engrossed copy was printed and signed by most of the 56 delegates in the Assembly Room. Signing was an act of treason and punishable by death, to which Benjamin Franklin claimed,
We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall hang separately.
War broke out.
And you may be surprised to realize that the war did not always go on the American side. As a matter of fact, during the war, Philadelphia and this very room and the building were taken over by the British during the war. Now, slowly, as victory seemed at hand, the British were being pushed out of the American colonies and pushed out of Philadelphia. The Second Continental Congress, which had moved
With victory at hand, a new convention met in this room and ratified the Articles of Confederation, which established a loose union of the states. After the surrender at Yorktown in 1781, this confederation was truly independent from England.
And this was good for the states for a while, but eventually as a nation we were being ripped apart. We had states disputing, sometimes with arms, over state boundaries.
So in May of 1787, delegates met again in this room. George Washington was elected chairman. Franklin, 81 and suffering from the gout, was carried to and from the sessions in a sedan chair. It was soon suggested that no attempt be made to revise the Articles of Confederation, but that a new constitution be written. Technically, that would be an attempt to overthrow the government. So it was agreed that the meetings be held in secret and that certain measures be taken. The doors and windows were closed and a guard was placed around the building. The delegates met from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. 6 days a week. The result was the wholesale scrapping of the Articles of Confederation and the creation of a new frame of government, the Constitution of the United States of America. James Madison, considered the father of the Constitution, suggested a government divided into 3 separate parts: executive, legislative, and judicial, so that one branch will always be held in check by the power of the other 2.
We do have some interesting artifacts here. One of them is the inkstand, called the Singh inkstand. It was manufactured by a silversmith here in Philadelphia in 1752 named Philip Singh. We believe that is the one that the delegates used to dip their pens in to sign the Declaration of Independence. And we believe that that was here when the Constitutional Convention was here in 1787. One other artifact is the chair that sits behind the president's table here. Okay, it is said that Benjamin Franklin leaned at that time to the gentlemen surrounding him and said,
I have often and often in the course of session and the vicissitudes of my hopes and fears as to its issue, looked at that sun behind the president without being able to tell whether it was rising or setting. But now, at length, I have happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun.
From that point on, the chair has been entitled the Rising Sun Chair. This is the room where it came together. We have ideologies present in the colonies, and finally, this is where they take place into action. We have the action of independence and the war with the Declaration. We have the action of those ideals being placed further into action with an extended national government, first in the Articles of Confederation, and secondly, in the Constitution of the United States. As a result, really, of these actions, more so than the spirit projected by the artifact, this is probably the most significant room anywhere in the United States as far as our history and the founding and forwarding of our nation is concerned.
Old City Hall was opened in the 1790s as the Philadelphia City Hall, but it's best known as the meeting place of the United States Supreme Court. Article 3 of the Constitution provides for an independent judiciary as one of the 3 branches of government. This room, as the seat of the United States Supreme Court, embodies that spirit of judicial independence. On the other side of Independence Hall sits Congress Hall. During the last decade of the 18th century, it was home to the legislative branch, the House of Representatives and the Senate.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the United States House of Representatives. And it was started in 1787, it was completed in 1789. And really just in time, because in 1790, the national capital is going to move from New York City here to Philadelphia. It'll be located here for 10 years. Now, when they first arrived here in 1790, they gave this particular chamber to the House, and on the second floor above our heads, that was given to the Senate.
The senators met in what was considered to be the finest room in all of Philadelphia. You'll notice the ceiling was richly decorated with moldings, including the symbol of the United States, the bald eagle. The United States Senate was a very prestigious group. At this time, members of the U.S. Senate were appointed by their states. It was only within the 20th century that senators were elected by the people.
The 2 very important events will happen here that really bespeak the new nation. The first is the addition of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, our Bill of Rights in 1791, and John Adams will be inaugurated second president of the United States on that platform. Let me set the scene for you a little bit. It's March 4, 1797. You're sitting in here as representatives. All these chairs are full. Even the Senate is sitting over here. United States justices for the Supreme Court are seated in this area, and you'll notice 3 chairs over here. One is reserved for the ambassador from Spain, the other for Thomas Jefferson, the new Vice President of the United States. You hear the Liberty Bell strike 12 in the steeple. And if you look out on Chestnut Street, you see a large carriage come down the street headed by 4 white horses. Out of that carriage jumps George Washington. Standing ovation by the crowd out on the street, he comes down the sidewalk and enters the building here. And one person who was here said this chamber was so crowded with people you could not move. However, when George Washington stepped through those doors, it was like a boat going through water. Everybody just got out of his way. Again, he enters the chamber to a standing ovation, greets everybody, and takes his seat right next to this platform. And he will witness John Adams stand in this area to be inaugurated the second President of the United States. And what makes that event so important is that it's the first peaceful transfer of power under our new government from one president to the other. And when John Adams finishes his inauguration, he walks through these doors, followed by Thomas Jefferson, and followed by George Washington, citizen of the United States.
Facing the front of Independence Hall sits the Liberty Bell Pavilion, which houses one of the most enduring symbols from the 18th century, the Liberty Bell.
Now, this bell was to serve the city of Philadelphia as a communication device. It was also cast to commemorate the 50th anniversary of William Penn's Charter of Privileges. Under that charter, Penn, the founder of the colony, guaranteed religious toleration for all those who professed and believed in one God. But I don't want to mislead you. The bell I've just been talking about and this bell are not the same one. That original bell came to this colony in 1751, and the first time it was tested, it cracked. A new bell, the bell that you see right here, replaced it. It was cast in 1753 here in Philadelphia by John Pass and John Stowe. In May of 1775, this bell announced the convening of a Second Continental Congress from a tower across the street atop the Pennsylvania State House. A year later, in July 8, 1776, the bell would ring again. This time, it would summon Philadelphians out in back of the State House to hear Colonel John Nixon publicly proclaim that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. That all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. The bell rang for the very last time in 1846. A small hairline crack which had developed here in the lip spread right into the shoulder and ultimately into the crown of the bell. It could no longer be used as a communication device.
Around the shoulder of the bell is the inscription from Leviticus: "Proclaim liberty throughout the land and to the inhabitants thereof." So it's fitting that Philadelphia, a city established as a holy experiment based on Quaker ideals, would be host to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and others as they shaped the country, that Philadelphia would be the birthplace of America.